For those of you who don't know me, I'm Eric Beer. And about a year and a half ago, I found myself being pretty unhappy with my health. I weighed more than I wanted to weigh. My doctor was starting to mumble things about pre-diabetic, and I wasn't quite sure what to do about it. I ended up going on a low-carb diet. I lost 25 pounds in the first 5 months. I've kept them off ever since, plus or minus 5 pounds. You know how things go. And as some of my other health indicators improved as well. The diet's worked really well for me. My current plan is to stay on it for the rest of my life or until I discover something better. Here's a general overview of the talk. I'll tell you a little bit about how I discovered low carb in the media and at the same time give you some recommendations for things that you might want to read. I'll give you a very brief history of the low carb and low fat controversy, because the big question always is, how come we've been told for years we were supposed to eat low fat, and now we're being told to eat low carb? I'll try to give a partial answer to that question, though it's a long story. Then I'll talk about some of the things that low carb diets are good for. Those things include losing weight, preventing all kinds of diseases. They're even good for athletes. Kind of a surprise after athletes have talked for years about carb packing, right, before their events. I talk about a particular version of the low-carb diet called the well-formulated ketogenic diet that is particularly highly recommended. And then we'll get into the fun part and talk about food. At the very end, I'll talk about my own health results. So, a year and a half ago, I wasn't feeling too good about my health, wasn't sure what to do about it. I heard this podcast, National Public Radio, The Bittersweet Truth About What We Eat. It was a panel discussion. One of the panelists was Gary Taubes. He's an award-winning science and health writer, and I had never heard of him before. But the chairman of the panel said, when I read your New York Times article back in 2002, it changed my life and it changed the way I eat. And I thought, whoa, okay, I'm intrigued. What's all that about? So here's the first paragraph of that article from back in 2002. What if it's all been a big fat lie? And I thought to myself, wow, I think to myself now, if only I'd read that back in 2002, I might have started this diet 15 years earlier and be even healthier now than I am. But I got curious about Gary Taubes, and I started reading some of his books. I started with Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It, which is kind of the medium-length one of the three. I thought, oh, maybe I can handle that. Before I even finished the book, I said, uh-oh. I think this guy may be right. In fact, I think I want to try this diet. And I ended up reading the other books as well. One of the first books I grabbed off of Amazon after that was The New Atkins for a New You, which is both kind of a combination of background about why you might want to try low-carb diets, plus recipes and advice on how to get started. It also turned out to be a great purchase because the three authors of the book, Dr. Finney, Dr. Volek, and Dr. Westman are three of the guiding lights of the low-carb movement. I didn't know that at the time. I just lucked out. But I ended up reading some more of their books. This new book, Genius Foods, just came out. I recommend it because it is just like this awesome overview, summary of everything low-carb, plus some intermittent fasting, plus some exercise tips all rolled up into one book. So if you can, get your hands on that one. Grain Brain is interesting because it talks about the effects of carbohydrates not only on your body but also on your brain. And some of these other books are really interesting as well. The Hacking of the American Mind, Dr. Lustig, I think he actually works in San Francisco. And he's talking about how people tend to get addicted to things like sugar. Because it triggers dopamine. We all like to get some dopamine every now and then. And how companies are able to manipulate that in order to get us to buy things that we would not otherwise buy. So check that one out. Here are a lot of background videos. I sent an email before this talk about the Maybe the Magic Pill. If you haven't gotten a chance, it's on Netflix and Amazon. just came out last year, some great information about low-carb diets. All of the folks on this slide are wonderful. They all have YouTube channels full of information, various links of little videos that'll give you background information. And a reason to ask me for a copy of these slides is so that you can get all of these names without having to take notes. So I wondered when I first heard about this stuff, is this for real? I felt like I'd missed the memo. Like, what? Low-carb diets? Everyone's been telling me low fat, and when did this happen? So, so I did a bunch of poking around on the internet and concluded that, yes, indeed, this is real. It's been on the cover of Time magazine many times. There are magazines dedicated to low carb. There are low carb podcasts, take your pick. You can listen to them while you're jogging or doing your workout in the gym. Are there low carb food pyramids? There are. You know, here's the old traditional food pyramid that I grew up with, right? Lots of grains at the bottom. Here's the Atkins variety, kind of from the 70s. We put the meat at the bottom. And now we're coming around to the understanding that actually, if you want to be healthy, the thing that you want to eat the most of is fat. I realize those are kind of controversial words in a lot of circles. So let me tell you a little bit about what I heard from Gary Taubes. So this is his long book, his 600-page tome, Good Calories, Bad Calories. And Gary Taubes is very careful about not putting his own opinion in the book. Like, he wants you to reach your own conclusions. And so for chapter after chapter after chapter in this book, he's just presenting the evidence. And I'm getting frustrated, feeling like, all right, let's sum it all up, Gary. What do you really think? Finally, you get to the epilogue of the book, and he's willing to come out with it. He says, certain conclusions seem inescapable to me based on the existing knowledge. Dietary fat, whether saturated or not, is not a cause of obesity, heart disease, or any other chronic disease of civilization. So, what we've been told for the last 50 years, throw it out the window. The problem is the carbohydrates in the diet. Their effect on insulin secretion and thus the hormonal regulation of homeostasis. The more easily digestible and refined the carbohydrates, the greater the effect on our health, weight, and well-being. He also wrote, through their direct effect on insulin and blood sugar, refined carbohydrates, starches, and sugars are the dietary cause of coronary heart disease and diabetes. They are the most likely dietary causes of cancer, Alzheimer's disease, and other diseases. So that was it from Gary Taubes. Now what about Dr. David Perlmutter? He's an interesting guy. He's both a neurologist and also trained in nutrition. So he felt like it was time someone wrote a book on the combination of the two, how your diet affects your brain. And one of his conclusions are the origin of brain disease is in many cases predominantly dietary, although several factors play into the genesis and progression of brain disorders. To a large extent, numerous neurological afflictions often reflect the mistake of consuming too many carbs and too few healthy fats. What's really going on with a lot of these diseases, Alzheimer's, dementia, etc., is you're ending up with inflammation in your brain. And that inflammation is, at least the primary dietary cause of it appears to be gluten. So those of you who have been eating gluten-free, you're doing something good for your brain, but also on high carbohydrate diets. All right, so I found that all very intriguing. Now, kind of a history of all of this. Did this just come out of the blue? Well, actually not. Let's go back about 1.8 million years. Homo erectus, our ancestors, they're hunter-gatherers. Not only are they hunter-gatherers, but they're hunter-gatherers for a long time, like about 1.8 million years. And while they're being hunter-gatherers, they're eating a lot of fat and protein and occasional fruit that seasonally ripens and is available to them. And maybe something dug up from the ground like a tuber and so forth. But they're definitely not eating refined sugar. No refined flour in the diet of the hunter-gatherer. The other thing that's going on during those 1.8 million years is that they're evolving to their environment. Their metabolisms are getting used to this kind of diet. Now, the age of agriculture begins about 20,000 BC. People start gathering grains and eating those. 12,000 BC, we have some of the grains that we all recognize. The point here is that if you look at the whole of human evolution, we spent about 99% of it being hunter-gatherers and getting used to a diet of fat and protein and so forth, and only about 1% of it being used to relying on agriculture. We just haven't had enough time to adapt to it. Now let's zoom forward about 1.8 million years to 1864. We have this guy, William Banting. He's an undertaker and he's obese. He hates being obese and he tries a lot of different diets. Nothing works for him until finally he gets advice from a friend saying, try this low-carb diet. He tries it and that does the trick. He loses a whole bunch of weight. He is so pleased that he decides to write a book about it. A little booklet, a little pamphlet called On Corpulence. He publishes it. It sells very well. It goes around the world. People read it all over the place. They try the diet. It works for them too. In fact, his name becomes a household word. People say, do you bant, meaning are you on a diet? And a low-carb diet in particular. So we already knew in the 19th century that low-carb diets work, but we forgot. We got another clue in the early 20th century. Fortunately, there was still some populations on the planet Earth who had not switched over to the Western diet yet. From a researcher's standpoint, that's a real opportunity, right? If they switch from their traditional diet to a Western diet and something changes in their health, then you might start asking, well, why did it change? And what was it about the Western diet that made the difference? And that's exactly what happened. And these are two examples here that Gary Taubes wrote about in Good Calories, Bad Calories. Dr. Samuel Hutton was up in Labrador, Newfoundland. Kind of gets cold up there. Not a whole lot of vegetables to eat in the first place. We have Dr. Albert Schweitzer, eventually won the Nobel Peace Prize. He's in West Africa working with the folks there. Both of them report back from these very different locations of the world saying, you know, it's the funniest thing, no one here has cancer. You know, I've never seen anything like it. But what happened to their populations and other populations around the world is that as people switched to the Western diet, cancer started to appear in the population. And the interesting thing is, as this slide says, there's a collection of diseases that tend to come together. When a population switches to the Western diet, all of a sudden all of these appear. Diabetes, cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, stroke, various forms of cancer, dental cavities, gum disease, appendicitis, etc. Once one of them begins to appear, all of them begin to appear. Maybe they're related in some way. And in fact, scientists at the time began to hypothesize that it was sugar, flour, and other refined carbohydrates that were the root cause of this disease. They were on the right track. That was the big change in the diet that hadn't been there before, that hadn't been there during the 1.8 million years that we were adapting to a hunter-gatherer diet. It was a really good hypothesis, but it was derailed. It was derailed in several different ways. I'll point you to two of them. One of them happened in the 50s. There was a researcher by the name of Ansel Keys, and he was looking at populations. He was really interested in heart disease. And he did this study that became famous or notorious, depending on how you look at it, where he picked 7 countries. He just done a previous study where he looked at 21 different countries. He found that in 7 of them, there seemed to be a high correlation between having high total serum cholesterol and having heart disease. He said, maybe cholesterol is causing heart disease. He focused in on those 7 countries. He picked a bunch of subjects. He did blood tests. He looked at outcomes, and he said, sure enough, the folks who are getting a lot of heart disease have high cholesterol in their blood. Maybe the one causes the other. And then he did the blood test, and he did find, again, a correlation. Now, correlation, as we know, is not causation. Just because the total blood cholesterol was high doesn't mean that that was causing heart disease. It might be a side effect of having coronary problems. But Ansel Keys thought, maybe eating a lot of cholesterol causes blood cholesterol to be high, and blood cholesterol being high causes heart disease. There turns out to be a lot of flaws in that hypothesis. Actually, the root cause of heart disease, as Gary Taub says, appears to be carbohydrates. But the journalists loved it. They thought, oh, we eat less fat and we get less heart disease. We can just visualize, right? You eat some fat, it ends up in your bloodstream. It's kind of like, bacon grease in your drain. It clogs things up. Everyone could visualize it. It was easy to explain. The people loved the idea. It grabbed hold. The only problem with it was that it wasn't true. The human body doesn't work that way. Our bodies are these wonderful chemical factories that are constantly turning one chemical into another. Fat does not flow willy-nilly through our bloodstream. It's all packaged up in these nice, tidy little spheres called lipoproteins, so that it doesn't get into too much mischief. That would be a whole other talk. The other way that the research was derailed was that sugar companies formed alliances, put together a budget for PR and research, and found all kinds of ways to influence public opinion, public policy, and even the research that got done. And one of the examples of this that came to light recently that generated a lot of excitement was actually some researchers here in San Francisco found some documents showing that the sugar industry paid scientists, and not just any scientists, but scientists from Harvard who were about to publish an article in the New England Journal of Medicine, and bribed them to bias the article in favor of sugar and against fat. That strategy was very successful, and since then, the sugar industry and other parts of the food industry have been very successful at applying money to influence research, to influence public policy. They make sure they always have someone sitting on all the important policy committees, and to influence public opinion. It's very reminiscent, if you read the book, The Case Against Sugar, of what the tobacco industry did back when they were trying to argue that tobacco does not cause lung cancer. You hire very clever people to make very clever arguments. And you try to steer the whole world away from anyone coming to the conclusion that it might be sugar that was the problem. Here's some recent history of sugar consumption. Back in 1820, your average American ate less than 10 pounds of sugar a year. Notice the steady increase. It's now up above 100 pounds of sugar per year per person, 10 times as much as back in 1820. And even in 1820, that was a lot of sugar for an organism that grew up as a hunter-gatherer. Funny thing, the obesity epidemic kind of mirrors this curve. So back in 1960, we all got the advice, with the blessing of the medical community and the United States government, that we should all eat low-fat. So how did that work? Not so great. We've become more and more obese since then. At the present time, we have about 1/3 of the population now obese, about 2/3 of the population, an additional 1/3 overweight. And that seems to be just going up. If things continue this way, it looks like half of the population may be obese before too long. So in '73, Dr. Atkins did something very brave. Even in this environment where everyone was saying, fat is the problem, fat is the problem, he published his diet saying, stop eating carbohydrates. And guess what? The diet worked. Just the way it did in the 19th century. People hadn't changed. Eating low carb could still lose you the weight you wanted to lose. 1999, Time magazine came around, started saying low carb diets are all the rage. And in 2014, they were even more blunt. On the cover of the magazine, scientists labeled fat the enemy, why they were wrong. Now, the Women's Health Initiative is interesting. So, back in 1993, the medical community, I think, wanted to make up for the fact that they had not done a whole lot of good research on women. So they picked a large number of postmenopausal women and to study their health. One of the recent outputs from the Women's Health Initiative is this study here. which I bring to your attention. It says, these findings suggest that a low-fat diet may promote weight gain in postmenopausal women, whereas a reduced carbohydrate diet may decrease risk of postmenopausal weight gain. And that's a study with a whole lot of subjects. I like this one too, back in November of last year. This was a study done on over 100,000 subjects in 18 countries on 5 continents. They were asking people about their diet and looking to see what health outcomes. At the end of that study, they concluded that high carbohydrate intake was associated with higher risk of total mortality, whereas total fat and individual types of fat were related to lower total mortality. So if you want to live longer, eat more fat, less carbs. And they noted that saturated fat had an inverse association with stroke. So it's good for preventing stroke to eat saturated fat, a fat that we've been told for years we were to avoid at all costs. They think that the global dietary guidelines should be reconsidered in light of these findings. I agree with them. The very beginning of this year, January 1, there was this cute article in the Business Insider written by a lady about doing a low-carb diet in Silicon Valley. She even called it a Silicon Valley health craze. I just point this out because if you're thinking of doing a low-carb diet, you live in a great place to do it. There are lots of people around here who are doing it, can give you advice, recipes, assistance, etc. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that low-carb diets are good for. First off, losing weight. Now here, it really helps to have a better mental model than I used to have. I used to have a mental model that I call the full belly model. So you look at the statistics here. Fat has 9 calories per gram. Alcohol has 7. Protein has 4. Carbohydrates, 4. Looking at that and looking at nothing else, you would say, well, if I eat 3 times a day, I eat until my belly is full. If I want to reduce the total number of calories I take in, my best choices should be protein and carbohydrates, right? That's what should work to lose weight. But the full belly model is wrong. It doesn't work that way. In fact, you want to eat mostly fat. Okay, so how can that be? And Gary Tabb says, he put together the results of some studies. He figured that your odds of losing 40 pounds on a diet using low carbohydrates is about 50%. Not everyone succeeds, but that's not bad. Your odds of losing it on a diet with high carbohydrates are about 1%. All right, so your odds are about 50 times better on a low-carb diet if you need to lose 40 pounds. And here's a related result, a randomized trial on 53 obese women. Some of them were put on a low-fat diet, some of them were put on a very low-carbohydrate diet. Here's the weight loss curve for those on the low-fat diet. Here's the weight loss curve for those on the very low-carbohydrate diet. Folks on the ketogenic diet, another name for low-carb diets, lost 2.2 times more weight. And to my eye, they're still going down here, whereas the low-fat folks are coming back up. All right, so what's going on here? To understand what's going on here, it really helps to understand how the body reacts to the 3 major kinds of food, 3 macronutrients, as they call it. Carbohydrates, protein, and fat. When you eat carbohydrates, your blood sugar level goes up, right? The body digests the carbohydrates, the body turns it into glucose. Glucose level in your blood goes up. Now, your body doesn't particularly care for glucose. It's a dangerous chemical. It causes free radicals. It makes chemical bonds to things it shouldn't make chemical bonds to, changes their shape, and destroys their function. Your body doesn't want a whole lot of that going on. So it would like to get that blood sugar level back down again as quickly as possible. It does that by having the pancreas detect that you've got glucose in your blood, and your pancreas releases insulin. We'll talk about insulin a bit more in a moment. But just remember, when you eat carbohydrates, your glucose levels go up high and they go up fast. What about when you eat protein? When you eat protein, your glucose levels still go up, but they go up more slowly and they don't go as high. Why do they go up when you eat protein? Protein doesn't turn immediately into glucose, but your body can turn protein into glucose, and it does so all the time. It's a process called gluconeogenesis. So, once again, the glucose levels go up. What about when you eat fat? When you eat fat, you have almost no glucose increase whatsoever. There's a tiny one, which diabetics have to worry about, and it takes a long time. But for the most part, when you eat fat, there's no effect on your blood sugar whatsoever. So it's probably not going to surprise you looking at this diagram that I'm going to recommend to you that you eat a diet with high fat, moderate protein, and low carbohydrates. It's just the opposite of this diagram. Okay, but so what? Glucose went high, your insulin went high. What's the problem? Well, here's the problem. So let's eat some refined carbohydrates. Only kidding, don't do it. All right, well, let's pretend that we did. All right, so we're now in a high glucose state and a high insulin state. Pancreas has just made a lot of insulin. So insulin is a peptide hormone. It circulates around in the body, basically giving messages to our cells. And depending on what kind of cell you are, you get a different message. So if you're a muscle cell and insulin comes along, bumps into one of your insulin receptor here, you get the message that says, whoa, time to burn glucose. Let the glucose in, keep the fat out. We have a glucose emergency. We need to get it out of the blood. The concentration of glucose in the blood is too high. Glucose is a dangerous chemical. Let's get it out of there. So your muscles start burning glucose faster. Now when your fat cells get insulin on their insulin receptors, they get a different message. The message is, do not let fat out. This is not a time to be burning fat. We are in a glucose emergency. We are burning glucose right now, thank you very much. So please store fat, don't release it. All right, so what happens if you're in the high insulin state for a long time? Well, those processes just keep running, right? Your muscles are burning off glucose, because that's what they're told to do. Your fat cells are storing fat, because that's what they're told to do. And which kinds of energy molecules are left in your blood? Nothing, right? You burned off all the glucose, because your muscles were told to do that. And you stored the fat and didn't release it, so you don't have any of that in your blood. So what do you think you feel like when your blood looks like that? Do you feel like going out and jogging around the block? No, you've got no energy. And you also feel hungry, right? Boy, I've got no energy in my blood, I better eat something. And if you're on a high carbohydrate diet, you're probably eating a lot of high carbohydrates for your snack. That puts you back in the high insulin state again, and the process continues. So you end up eating a lot. You eat breakfast, you eat snacks, you eat lunch, you eat a snack, you eat dinner, you eat a snack, maybe a bedtime snack. And overall, after eating all those meals and snacks, you've eaten a lot of calories. All right, so let's look at the other side of the coin. What if you keep your insulin levels low in some way or another? How do you do that? Your muscle cells are now not allowed to burn glucose. The gateway that allows glucose in only works if insulin is around, so they don't burn glucose. They burn fat. They let fat in. And the fat cells are not being told, hey, glucose emergency, don't release fat. So they release fat. So you got fat flowing into your blood, and you got muscles burning the fat. Kind of a nice circuit, don't you think? Particularly if you want to lose weight. There's your stored fat flowing into your blood, and it's getting used. Nice. Now, if you're in that kind of state, you've got plenty of energy molecules in your blood. You're ready to do some exercise, and you don't feel like eating. In fact, folks who are on low-carb diets, which is one way to keep your insulin low, often eat fewer meals. 3 meals a day, maybe down to 2. Some even drop down to 1 meal a day. Why? Because they're not hungry. They feel fine. All right, before I go on, if you just want to lose a little weight, you don't have to hear the rest of the talk. Just do this simple thing. Skip desserts. Don't drink juice. Don't drink beer. Don't have sugar in your coffee and tea. Why do you want to avoid those 4 things? Because all of those 4 things, and particularly the last 3, which are what's called liquid carbohydrates, those spike your blood sugar the highest and the fastest. So avoid those, you probably lose them. All right, so losing weight, that's kind of a good thing to do. What about some of the other diseases of civilization, as they are called? So here's my partial list of diseases that are now being associated with carbohydrates in one way or another. We just did obesity, gout, particularly with fructose, diabetes, also fructose and glucose, cancer, high blood pressure, heart attack, stroke, irritable bowel syndrome, gum disease and cavities, chronic kidney disease, skin and tissue aging, Alzheimer's, dementia, ADHD, epilepsy, depression. This is a partial list. And in the case of the mental diseases, as I said, gluten is implicated as well as carbohydrates themselves. I had a friend of mine who said, you know, you have me at reduced aging. So I thought I'd lead off with that. So how does that work? So if you have high glucose levels in your blood a lot of the time, then the problem with glucose molecules is that they're kind of sticky. I guess you kind of know that if you've ever spilled a soda pop on a countertop or juice. Pretty sticky stuff. And that's true in your bloodstream as well. So glucose molecules will stick to things. They will stick to, what does it say here? Proteins and lipids. They stick to collagen fibers. Now your skin has collagen fibers, and if your skin is nice and soft and young feeling, those collagen fibers are probably moving nicely with respect to one another. But glucose molecules can come along, bond to one collagen fiber, then bond to another collagen fiber, and now those collagen fibers don't move so well relative to each other because they're stuck together by the sticky glucose. That's exactly what happens to your Thanksgiving turkey when you roast it. You're taking advantage of the fact that those sugars are ligating, as they call it, some of the other molecules in the turkey, making that nice, tough, brown texture on the surface of the turkey. We like that on the skin of the turkey. We don't like it on our own skin, for the most part. And as Aubrey de Grey writes, this is happening not only in your skin, but in your arteries, your kidneys, your heart, your eyes, your skin, your nerves. Sugar is aging you. So it seems like a good idea to keep the level of sugar in your blood down if you don't want to age too fast. Now let's talk about diabetes. So diabetes is kind of the root cause of many other diseases. It's really good to avoid getting diabetes if you can. You know, type 2 diabetes is really what I'm talking about here. We can talk about type 1 as well, but in type 2 diabetes, you've gotten to the state where your body is trying to make more insulin than it in fact can make, and you're no longer controlling your blood sugar levels. Now, to understand why this happens and why this often happens later on in life, you need to understand a little bit about insulin resistance. So when we're young, we tend to be insulin sensitive. Insulin works really well in our bodies. We eat some carbohydrates, our glucose level goes up, the pancreas releases a little insulin, the cells immediately respond to it, blammo, they get that glucose out of the bloodstream, it's back down to a reasonable level, the insulin level drops back down, and the body's back into great shape again. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, insulin, like many drugs that we take, we eventually become resistant to it. The initial dose no longer works as well as it used to. Now, pancreas has a nice feedback mechanism for this. It notices, hey, I just put some insulin in the blood and the blood sugar didn't come down. So it says, oh, I guess I'll release some more. And it releases some more. And now we're going up this staircase. Now we eat carbohydrates and more insulin was released. Oh, but now there's a higher concentration of insulin in the blood, which means that we're now getting resistant to that level of the dose. And it goes up and up and up and up until maybe something happens. What can happen is your pancreas can say, I give up. I'm producing all the insulin I can produce. I can't produce no more. When that happens, then the blood sugar levels get out of control. There's just not enough insulin to force the muscles and other cells to pull that glucose out of the bloodstream. And now you have diabetes type 2. And it used to be that doctors would say, while you're here, you're healthy. Up here, you've got problems. You've got diabetes type 2. The problem is that while you're down here, you're not healthy. Because even though your blood sugar levels are relatively under control, your insulin levels are going up and up and up. And insulin is kind of a dangerous chemical in its own right. Plus, it's moving you down the pathway to diabetes. And now people are starting to call it metabolic syndrome if they notice that your insulin levels are staying high a lot of the time, even if your blood sugar levels are under control. So doctors used to think of this as a one-way street. You know, kind of part of the aging process. As we get older, we get more insulin resistant. There's nothing much to do about it. When it happens, we'll just declare you to be diabetic and start giving you medications, including perhaps insulin injections, to help you with the problem. Now, the problem with insulin injections is that that just continues the vicious cycle. You start getting resistant to the level of insulin they're giving you, and you need more insulin over time. Turns out you can run the process backwards. That's what some of the doctors have recently discovered. What you do is you ask the patient to eat low-carb diet. Well, if they've got a low-carb diet, then the glucose doesn't spike. If the glucose doesn't spike, then the pancreas doesn't produce as much insulin. And the patient doesn't need as much insulin from those injections. So the body starts getting more sensitive to lower dense levels of insulin again. But now you've got less insulin in your blood, so you start getting sensitive to the lower insulin. You're in a virtuous cycle. And doctors now sometimes get to have the thrill of telling a patient, well, you have type 2 diabetes, but you don't have it anymore. One of those doctors is this lady here, Dr. Sarah Hallberg. She works in a weight loss and diabetes clinic. She gave a wonderful TED Talk that you can see on YouTube, and lots of great YouTube videos to go along with that, including one on how to start a low-carb, high-fat. That's what LCHF stands for. Lifestyle, you can check her out. She also has these lovely little YouTube videos where she says things like, well, what if you want to drink alcohol on a low-carb diet? How does that work? Or what about fruit? So you can check her out. So what about heart disease? So as Gary Taub says, the most likely dietary cause of heart disease is carbohydrates. Here's a heart surgeon who agrees with Gary. This guy is Dr. Dwight Lundell. Years ago, I think back in 2012, he released this open letter to the internet saying, you're probably wondering if we heart doctors are going to apologize for all the bad advice we've been giving you for the last 50 years about low-fat diets. I apologize. not too many heart doctors are brave enough to do that, but he was. He said the injury and inflammation in our blood vessels is caused by the low-fat diet that we've been recommending. Sorry about that. It's the processed carbohydrates, and it's also the omega-6 vegetable oils. So this slide, as you can see, is very detailed. It would take me a long time to go through it. I won't try to go through the whole thing. But since this whole controversy began with some researchers saying fat causes heart disease, I felt obliged to understand as well as I could, well, all right, then what does? And essentially what this diagram is showing is, all right, here you've got an artery. The artery starts to get sick. It gets sicker and sicker. Around here you have hardened arteries and high blood pressure. And if things go even more badly, you could end up with a heart attack. And along the pathway, sugar and carbohydrates in general, too many omega-6 oils, and the fact that you're eating a low-fat diet all play a role in getting you into a bad place. What about cancer? This was one where Gary said, well, probably carbohydrates cause cancer. And I can see why he hedged. I've got my little warning sign here. This model is in flux. A lot of research going on in this area right now, and every time I take a look at it, things have changed in some direction or another. But here's what seems to be going on. So we know that if you're worried that you have cancer and your doctor wants to find out where that cancer might be, they give you a PET scan. A PET scan is a scan that looks for where the sugar is going in your blood.
So sugar likes to hang out with cancers. We've known that for a long time. We don't know exactly the mechanism. But what people have discovered is that there tends to be a lot of glucose being burned off in the neighborhood of a cancer. Now that's bad news because glucose, as I said, is a dangerous molecule. It can produce free radicals. And one of the things that free radicals can do is damage your DNA. Ooh. So you've got this area where cells are dividing a lot, and you've got this source of damage to the DNA. That could produce a mutation. That could make your cancer worse, more malignant. That's bad. But also, if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, you've probably got high insulin a lot of the time, particularly if you're insulin resistant. And insulin looks a lot to your cells like this other chemical called insulin-like growth factor. In fact, the name just kind of says it all, right? So insulin and insulin growth factor can both cause cancer cells to divide more often. That's bad too, they become more malignant. Now one of the things that folks have discovered is that some cancer cells, not all, but some cancer cells have been mutated to the point that they can no longer burn fat, even though the ability to burn fat is a standard component of most healthy cells. Well, that's kind of cool. That means that if you were able to keep the glucose down in your blood, those cells which can only burn glucose, these cancer cells which can only burn glucose and cannot burn fat, might just die of starvation. That might be a good plan. And that works for a bunch of people. See the little caveat here? If your cancer cell has been mutated so much that it can no longer produce enzyme PKC-zeta, don't ask me what that is. This trick doesn't seem to work anymore because those cells can now burn fat again. What about low carbs in athletes? Right, so we all know that athletes like to do carb packing before events. What they're essentially doing if an athlete does carb packing is you're eating enough carbohydrates that your liver takes some of the excess glucose that you don't need at the moment, turns it into a chemical called glycogen and stores it. It gets stored in the liver, it gets stored in the muscles. You can store, I don't know, enough 1,000 calories of glycogen, something like that. It basically, if you're about to run a long race or bike along a bike route, you've now got this kind of 1,000 calories holding tank inside your liver ready to go. But what if you're a really long distance athlete? What if you're in a race to run 100 miles? That 1,000 calories of glycogen is going to run out long before you get to the finish line. What if you were burning fat instead? What if you were a fat-adapted athlete and you're on a ketogenic diet and you're burning fat? Your body has 30,000 calories or so of fat, enough to power your body for about a month. I think that's enough to run the 100-mile race about 3 times. So if you don't want to be spending a lot of time in your race stopping to eat, you might want to burn fat instead. And some of the athletes who are trying this are setting new records, winning their events. There's a couple who rode all the way to Hawaii by being on a low-carb diet. I don't know what they packed in their boat. Maybe a lot of butter or something. All right, so let's talk about the well-formulated ketogenic diet. So here's a diagram that shows kind of on the spectrum of what percentage of your diet comes from carbohydrates, what percentage from protein, and the third axis, fat, is kind of implied by subtracting out the other two. Where do these diets fall? So you got the orange diet up here, high carb diet. You've got the SAD, that's the standard American diet. We ketogenic folks love that acronym. Up here, it's very high carb, about half of your food coming from carbohydrates. The Mediterranean diet, some people think of it as a low-carb diet. That's only because it's lower carb than the SAD. The paleo diet makes it under the line. The paleo folks don't believe that it's okay to eat a lot of fat, so they make the difference by eating a lot of protein. That's why they're over here. And then my crew is here, the well-formulated ketogenic diet. They call this kind of a nutritional island of safety, like that. And it's a triangle because if you eat more protein, you have to eat fewer carbs to compensate, right? Because your body can turn protein into carbohydrate. So you want to stay in the island of safety, stay somewhere in there. Now, I listened to this YouTube video by this guy, Dr. Peter Attia. He talks about longevity, and he said something really interesting during one of his talks. He said, you know, I don't care what diet you eat. If you want to stay healthy for a long time and you want to live a long time, here's what you should do. Eat so that your blood sugar level stays at an average of about 85 milligrams per deciliter, with a standard deviation no greater than 15 milligrams per deciliter. Now, that's not very good practical advice. We're probably not all going to go out and buy blood glucose meters and test ourselves after every meal. But it gives you a feeling for why there's so much variation, right? So some people genetically are more tolerant of carbohydrates. Some people genetically have the extra saliva enzymes that pre-digest rice so that it doesn't cause a spike in blood glucose. Those people might be able to eat one of these other diets and still stay here at 85 plus or minus 15, right? This advice doesn't tell you, you gotta eat paleo, you gotta eat Mediterranean. That's the only diet that would ever work for anyone. It just says, here's the goal. If you were able to look inside yourself and see what's going on, this is actually what you're trying to achieve. So I pass that off to you. So the well-formulated ketogenic diet. These numbers are kind of scary numbers. You want about 70% of your calories to come from fat, 20% from protein, and then 10% or less from carbohydrates. Now, 70%, that sounds like a big number. That sounds like you're going to be eating butter and coconut oil all day long. But you have to remember that fat is concentrated. It has 9 calories per gram. Carbohydrates only have 4. So you don't have to actually eat so much to do that. It works out to about 50% of your food by weight is fat. And you get to count all the fat that's in anything you eat. If there's bacon, if there's some fat in your meat, if there's some fat in your cheese, that counts. Why is it called a ketogenic diet? Well, if you eat very low carbohydrate, then your body doesn't get much glucose directly from your food. Now, there are parts of your body that need glucose. Your brain needs some glucose. And it's just not going to have a lot of glucose around. You're eating a lot of fat. Fortunately, your body has another pathway for fueling the body in the case where there's not a lot of carbohydrates around, but there's a lot of fat around instead. Your liver makes these molecules called ketones. And some of us think of ketones as a kind of a clean-burning version of glucose. So a much less dangerous molecule, not so many chemical bonds that we don't want, not so many free radicals formed, but just as effective at powering your body. Ketones can power your brain in particular. Your heart seems to like them really well. So if you're eating low enough fat that your body's making these ketones, you're on a ketogenic diet. And it's looking, pardon me?
You said low enough fat.
Sorry, low enough carbs. Thank you. Then you're on a ketogenic diet. And your body's making ketones. And it's looking a whole lot like not only are the ketones a nice alternative fuel, but they have some benefits in their own right. And one guy who talks about that is Dr. Stephen Phinney. He has an MD from Stanford, a PhD from MIT, and did his postdoc at Harvard, so he's gotten his credentials. And in fact, he worked with athletes on some of the low-carb athletic stuff that I was just talking about earlier. And he's been looking at the research that shows that the main blood ketone, known as beta-hydroxybutyrate, seems to, at least in some lab animals, turn on the body's natural antioxidant system, a very powerful antioxidant system that is otherwise turned off. Check out his YouTube videos, he's wonderful. Here's Dr. Eric Westman. One thing that he does is he helps patients get started on low-carb diets. That's what he's doing in this video here. He's telling them, I want you to eat fat. Let me say that again. I want you to eat fat. I also want you to eat salt. I'll say that again. I want you to eat salt. Because this diet is different. It's like driving on a different side of the road. A bunch of things change when your body's in low-fat mode. So here's our switching from driving in America to driving in England kind of picture here. So what's different? Well, your traditional diet, Your body burns mainly glucose, you eat plenty of fruit, you avoid fats and oils, you reduce salt intake, you eat butter, cheese, and eggs sparingly, and you power your brain with glucose. Over on this side of the road, your body burns mainly fat and ketones, you eat fruit sparingly, you eat plenty of fats and oils, you eat plenty of salt, you eat butter, cheese, and eggs liberally, and you power the brain with ketones. And some glucose from protein. By the way, you don't have to eat any carbohydrates at all. The minimum daily requirement for carbohydrates is 0. But there's an adaptation period. It takes 2 to 3 weeks to switch over from being a glucose-burning kind of person to being a fat-burning kind of person. During that week, a bunch of things are going on inside your body. That storehouse of glycogen in your liver is going away, you're burning that off. It takes a few days to do that. Your gallbladder is cranking up. Wow, I've got more fat to deal with, it says. Your liver starts making ketones. During the adaptation period, you will be surprised by how many electrolytes you need. When you're on a low-fat diet, your kidneys excrete magnesium, potassium, calcium, sodium, whereas on a high-carb diet, they tend to retain those electrolytes. So you need more salt, more potassium, more calcium, more magnesium than you would otherwise need. All right, what about food? So I started this diet on what's called the new Atkins plan. Right? The old Atkins was very high protein. The new Atkins is moderate protein, high fat. They do it as a 4-phase program. In the first phase, you start out very low carb right from the beginning. They want you to feel it. They want you to know that you're on a diet, that something has changed. They want you to see those pounds melt away, and they do. Then they have other phases where basically the goal is to add back some of your favorite foods. You add back berries and nuts first in phase 2. In phase 3, you're trying to find out what your tolerance is for carbohydrates. Your body, not anyone else's body. What's going to work for you long term. And in the 4th phase, you do whatever that thing is. It helps to have some cookbooks, so you can get started right away. The internet is just full of low-carb recipes. Just type the words recipe low carb and any ingredient you've got, and there's a recipe out there. Trust me on this one. Keto comfort foods is fun for exactly the reason you think it is. So what do you have for breakfast? Well, it depends on who you are. Different people do this diet in different ways. But here's what I have for breakfast. I have a lot of eggs and a lot of meat for breakfast. In fact, I eat about 2 eggs a day, maybe a little more, right? So I'm going through 14 eggs a week. We go to Costco and get big cartons of eggs. You're hungry for some pancakes, you can use Carb Quick. It's kind of a low-carb version of Bisquick. There's some great fluffy buttermilk pancakes you can make with almond flour and buttermilk and a few other ingredients. I just made them yesterday. They were great. Omelets, don't skimp on the cheese. You're going to have those pancakes. You're going to have them with sugar-free syrup. You're going to have them with some berries. Make some nice homemade whipped cream. Take the heavy whipping cream, add some artificial sweetener and some flavor. I love whipped cream. People have said a lot of bad things over the years about bacon. I'll say a few good things about it now. You can get it nitrite and nitrate-free even from Costco. It is a mixture of different kinds of fats, saturated, monofat, saturated, etc. Most of those fats are on the good list. I don't think you find a lot of trans fats in bacon. And on this diet, you need more salt. All right, enough said. All right, more breakfast ideas. Some things with whipped cream, a little shredded coconut. Have some cheese. Take some ideas from continental breakfast dining.
Some folks on this diet have what they call bulletproof coffee, right? There's this company called Bulletproof that makes this stuff called MCT oil, medium chain triglycerides. That's it's a component of coconut oil, but it's the component of coconut oil that your liver turns most quickly into ketones to power your brain. So you're trying to wake up in the morning, you give your brain a jolt of ketones by drinking the MCT oil. Some people also put butter in the coffee or just coconut oil itself or heavy cream. If you're switching from having 3 meals a day to having 2 meals a day, one way to do it in the transition is to have nothing for breakfast except for bulletproof coffee. I'm avoiding caffeine, so I have bulletproof tea. Lunch. Salads are great, particularly ones with a lot of meat, eggs, and cheese on them. If you want a hamburger, have it cooked just the way you like, just avoid the bun. You can even make tuna boats, just don't put bread under them, find something else, like some zucchini. Blue cheese dressing, ranch dressing, avocado oil, all great things to have. Those little roll-up salami around cream cheese snacks are great. You can go to the Atkins aisle in Safeway and get some Atkins treats. Hard-boiled eggs are a handy snack. Some people get fancy and do endive with salmon and sour cream. Some people just spread butter right on cheese. I like to do that, actually. If you miss crackers, you can use crackers that are made of cheese, and I brought a couple there and there that you can try if you haven't tried them already. Lots of great dinner recipes. Our family tends to eat a lot of meat. Eat avocados whenever you can. If you have to eat light meat like chicken breast, at least serve it in a cream sauce so you get more fat with it. This broccoli here is a missed opportunity. Instead of steaming broccoli, you want to saute it in butter, right? Get some fat along with it. Your blueberries, don't just eat blueberries, have them with some heavy whipping cream, whipped or not. I turn a lot of things into salads, so you get rid of the bun of a hamburger, put it on some lettuce. You can have your mustard and your mayonnaise and have some salad dressing too. Turn tacos and burritos into salad. If you miss rice, you can have substitutes like riced cauliflower or a hemp seed pilaf. Dessert is not a huge part of the Atkins diet, but we all like something sweet every now and then, and there's sugar-free chocolates, blueberries and cream, blackberries, low-carb brownie mix, sugar-free syrup, low-carb cheesecake, and of course you can also just have a nice piece of cheese. So of course at this point in the talk you're wondering, how can I get more fat in my diet? So here are some ideas. Add butter to everything, add cheese, add cream, add bacon. If you're vegan, you might add avocado oil, olive oil, coconut oil. Don't buy low-fat anything, and if you're a carnivore, get cuts of meat with more fat. Enjoy flavor extracts. They have no carbs, but they're fun to eat. There's this great chart that you can get here at atkinscarbcounter.pdf. It's a little hard to present in a talk like this, so I have these more graphical charts. What you're probably going to be eating is more of these kinds of vegetables, things that grow above the ground, avocado, spinach, tomato, maybe some carrots. They're kind of controversial. They grow below ground, but they don't seem to spike glucose that much. Avoid corn. It's not really a vegetable, it's a grain. Nuts, you flip the advice that you've been getting for years. People have been telling you avoid macadamia nuts. They have too much fat. So now I will tell you, eat macadamia nuts. They've got plenty of fat. Pecans, lots of fat. Almonds and peanuts are pretty good. And I've been passing around some pili nuts because they are the highest fat, lowest carb nut I've found so far. Fat. Saturated fat used to be in the dog house. Now it is your friend. Eat plenty of saturated fat. Remember, you don't want to get a stroke. Monounsaturated fat like olive oil. Polyunsaturated not so much, because those tend to be omega-6 oils, and we have more than enough of those in our body. And trans fats are what you want to avoid. They tend to come in the processed foods. So this diet is very much a natural food diet, a real food diet, not a processed food diet. So you end up doing more cooking when you do this. It is true. Oils, and I should really include lard here too as one of the ones that you do eat. Try to avoid the omega-6s. Fruits, not a whole lot of selection here. A little watermelon, some berries, lemons and limes. I have lemon juice pretty much every day as one of the things I drink. Along with a little apple cider vinegar, makes what I call keto lemonade. You avoid the tropical fruits. Coconut you have on everything. Again, products that tend to be lower fat tend to be higher carbs. So here's our whole milk yogurt, 11 grams of carbohydrate. Here's our skim milk yogurt, 19 grams of carbohydrate. If you're going to a restaurant, there are lots of websites that will give you advice on which foods to try and which foods to avoid in any given particular kind of food that you might go to. So how did this work for me? Well, I lost 25 pounds. And I've kept it off. As of today, I'm down 1 more, so 26. My waist size went from 38 to 36, but luckily I still had some smaller pants in my closet. My good cholesterol went up. In fact, it was too low, and now it's good. My ratio got better. My triglycerides went down because my body's burning triglycerides, so they're not just floating around in my blood doing damage. My hemoglobin A1C, which is kind of a 3-month average of how much glucose is in my blood, is down around 5.1. Unfortunately, I didn't have a baseline for that, but that's now considered absolutely I don't have diabetes, so that's good news. I bought some little test strips so I could see if my body was producing ketones, and it is. I'm officially in ketosis. I need fewer medications than I was taking in the past. My blood pressure went down after the first 10 months. It's recently come back up again. I think that's more stress than the diet. And my bad cholesterol, LDL, actually went up, which normally can be considered bad. But what people have learned is there's actually several kinds of LDL. The small, dense LDL is the dangerous kind. There's a fluffy kind that's harmless. And that's likely what I've got now because I've got low triglycerides. So there's a little meter for measuring ketones and so forth. And here's my last slide. Benefits of a low-carb lifestyle: reduced aging, reduced likelihood of cancer, diabetes, heart attack, stroke, metabolic syndrome, obesity, high blood pressure, and Alzheimer's, better weight regulation, reduced oxidative stress and inflammation. And I'd love to talk to people about this, so if you have ideas, please talk to me either today or any day. And if you do learn how to eat this way, please teach other people how to do it, because a lot of people want to know this information.